So the Invincible War is finally over, and to say we have mixed feelings about it would be accurate. On one hand, we're sad we didn't get the overwhelming amount of evil marks that the comics gave us, including the in-house crossovers that really elevated the feeling of chaos and utter despair. On the other hand, Amazon knocked it out of the park, fleshing out some of the worst individuals in the multiverse as much as they could in the short amount of screen time they were all destined to have. In this video, we will take a look at all 18 Invincibles that showed up during Amazon's version of the Invincible War and rank them from bad to worse. So strap in and put on your safety belts, because this ride might get rough. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Charred Mark Grayson. Every Mark Grayson that showed up in this episode was evil on a baseline level. Let's get that out of the way immediately. All of these Marks are bad guys, and between the 18 of them, they turn Earth into a smoking wasteland. Just think about that. 18 men leave our entire planet in ruins, destroying major centers of power pretty much overnight while tying down some of the strongest and all of the available superheroes on it. The comics made this chaos feel a lot more realistic too, with all the Image Comics crossovers that the show couldn't pay for because obviously. But in amongst all them, there is one Invincible whose identity we're completely unaware of, and that's this guy. We're calling Charred Mark Grayson what we're calling him because his only appearance is as a charred corpse. What's worse is his killer is Powerplex, who in the comics decided to wait out to war to make his move. If that wasn't enough of an L, Charred Mark clearly didn't have a Powerplex in his universe. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been turned into a corpse whose identity pretty much cannot be ascertained. This is why he's at the bottom of our list, and one of the worst evil Marks, in the sense that he's pretty much useless. So were the next few guys on this list. Only Goggles Mark Grayson. Only Goggles Mark Grayson shows up for one scene in the entire season, and that's at the end of episode 7. He's the guy stand at the extreme back of the room on the left side when Angstrom Levy is addressing his hit squad. We don't see him in action all that much after that, so it's possible that he is actually Charred Mark Grayson. But at least that means that he died at the hands of an actual hero. The next couple of guys were basically killed by dead men. Bulletproof Mark Grayson. Fun fact, but did you know that Robert Kirkman was originally planning on calling his main character Bulletproof? We know, right? Imagine Mark Grayson, Bulletproof. Gosh, that just sounds silly. We're glad Kirkman decided on Invincible as his main character's name, because anything else just sounds lame to us now. But perhaps not as lame as the way in which he kills off his original idea for an MC, because Bulletproof Mark pretty much shows up for the introduction panel and then dies immediately after. He enters the Pentagon in an attempt to neutralize Earth's defenses, no doubt, like the next character on our list. But unlike the upcoming Invincible, Bulletproof Mark doesn't take too many Reanimen to the grave with himself. In fact, they tie him down pretty easily, and then one of them snaps his neck, Fiend style. We like to think that that was Kirkman doing meta-commentary on his original name and character design for Mark Grayson, but the next guy clearly wasn't, and he still got done dirty. Flaxen Mark Grayson. Flaxen Mark is an anomaly in that he's a look into a rather interesting what-if scenario that kind of plays out later in the series. If you're an Invincible fan, you know who the Flaxens are by now. They're those green guys that show up en masse whenever a pink portal opens up somewhere in the world, and they die within the hour unless they're wearing time-dilating bracelets on their arms. Mark's dad got stuck there once for 8 months, and he became known as the Destroyer in their dimension. But it looks like Flaxen Mark took things one step further and actually integrated himself within their culture. Since most evil Mark Graysons are rulers, it's not an exaggeration to think that Flaxen Mark became the Emperor of the Flaxens, which is a pretty impressive and terrifying achievement. The Flaxens are not easy customers by any means, so the fact that Mark subdued them is rather impressive. What isn't impressive is just how easily he was disposed of, because he pretty much became fodder for Cecil and his Reanimen. Flaxen Mark, being a thorough war veteran, headed for the GDA headquarters within the Pentagon to take out the brains of Earth's counteroffensive. Instead, he was cornered by Cecil using the sonic frequency emitter that he used on our Mark earlier in the season, and then beaten to death by the reanimant. Flaxen Mark took out a bunch of D.A. Sinclair's reformed creations and half of Donald Ferguson's body with himself before he died, so we can't say he was the worst of the bunch, but he did die by the hands of humans and their creations, and was explicitly labelled as being weaker than the main Invincible. Now, we don't know how much weaker this next guy was compared to our Mark, but we can certainly identify one department he might have been a little deficient in, and he certainly chose a unique way to compensate for it. Long hair short, King Mark Grayson. This one feels like a meta jab at Wolverine, who's also a short king originally, but the one long-haired variant of Mark Grayson that we get in the series wearing shorts simply cannot be a coincidence. He is one of the Invincibles who puts up a rather decent fight, engaged some of the superhero teams of America in rather intense battles, but ultimately he ends up dying as well, quite possibly at the hands of Oliver. Long hair short. King Mark is above all the other evil Invincible variants because he at least got a few licks of his own in on the planet before departing it. But in the end, he met the same fate as everyone else whom we've mentioned so far. So, we really can't put him any higher on this tier list based on strength and overall evilness. We're sure Short King Mark was a proper menace back where he comes from, but considering he can't go back there, it's a moot point to consider. What is interesting is that the next guy on this list ends up fighting someone Longhair Marky was supposed to go up against, and that is Mustache Mark Grayson. Well, the opponent is Tech Jacket, but the evil Mark that faces him isn't Longhair Mark, it's Mustache Mark. Mustache has a special place in our hearts because he looks just like his dad, and we're suckers for a good father-like son reference. But that's about where our attachment ends, because his mustache isn't just an aesthetic choice. It signifies his allegiance and devotion to the Viltrumite Empire, and the fact that Mark is somewhere in his 30s and sporting a Viltrum general uniform tells us a lot about the choices he made in life. We're glad that his death came to him at the hands of Tech Jacket, who is one of the few characters in the Invincible universe that can kill Viltrumites. He wears Geldarian tech, which is some of the most advanced tech you can get your hands on, and, in the comics, he blows up his suit and takes out 2 evil Invincibles, including one with long hair. He doesn't have to do that in the TV show, which means his debut appearance goes off as smooth as can be. Mustache Mark ends up as a dismembered corpse in space, and that brings us to the end of bad and sort of useless section of this video. Every Mark Grayson variant we will mention from this point onward is a lot worse than them in terms of strength, yes, but in terms of their characterization as well. All of them except the guy up next, that is. Masked Mark Grayson. You'd think that a guy who's supposed to look like Black Suit Spider-Man would have ignoble reasons for invading the dimension of a good version of himself, but Masked Mark might just be the nicest of all these maniacs. Don't get us wrong, he still helped Angstrom destroy much of planet Earth over the course of 3 days, but he didn't do it because he was a bloodthirsty maniac, or because he wanted to conquer planets in this dimension. He just wanted his mum back. Masked Mark, unlike other evil Invincibles, didn't hate his parents. He loved them, and Debbie especially. It must have been her death that pulled him into the darkness, because his deal with Angstrom was to take Prime Mark's Debbie back home with him. He laid waste to one of the major power centers of the world and rushed off to meet Levy above his home. He was the only one there who was glad to be back, and honestly, he's the only evil Mark we feel sad for when we think about the fact that he's going to be stuck in Angstrom's wasteland dimension for the rest of his life. But then, we remind ourselves that he was willing to murder thousands of innocent people just to kidnap one helpless woman, and we're reminded that he's one of the bad ones. Viltrumite Mark Grayson. If you thought Mustache Mark was a bit of a pansy, then don't worry folks, because this evil Grayson more than makes up for his lack of vigour. Viltrumite Mark pretty much has the same backstory as Mustache Mark, minus the mustache, we're guessing. He is this far up our list, despite having low screen time for 2 reasons. The first is the fact that he leaves the astounding Wolfman in a heap. When the Invincible War was announced, We had no idea which Image Comics characters we'd get to see in the crossover, and we're honestly glad that Wolfman, Brit and Tech Jacket could make it. But in the comics, it wasn't Wolfman who Viltrumite Mark killed in his dimension, it was the ruler of the shadows, Spawn. Spawn's appearance in Invincible was always doubtful because of the nightmare that is his creative license. But Wolfman is an acceptable replacement for him. Viltrumite Mark beats him down so much that he ends up crawling out of a crater, just to witness the destruction he was unable to stop. He's also one of the 8 evil Mark variants to survive the 3 days of warfare and end up in Angstrom's wasteland. Viltrumite Mark will end up becoming one of the final survivors of that dimension. And yes, that is a comic spoiler, but he's definitely one of the worst evil Marks out there, which is why he's so high up on our list. No Goggles Mark Grayson. This guy is as unhinged gets, because he's Mark, but with the personality of Conquest. No Goggles Mark Grayson is highlighted twice in the episode. The first time, he accidentally stumbles into Cahor's mummy cave and has to fly away to save himself from possession. It's one of the only funny moments in an episode that was filled with somber moments for the most part. Where his insanity really shined through was during his battle with the Guardians of the Globe. No Goggles Mark was being followed by Immortal in the desert, so when Immortal flew back to the Guardians' base, he must have followed him. No Goggles proceeded to ruthlessly murder every last clone of Duplicate, rip Shapesmith in half, leave Black Samson a bloody mess and Darkwing with a broken leg. He was laughing maniacally while he was doing all this, and he claimed that he didn't want the fun to stop. He remembered his father killing this Guardians team in his reality, but they were stronger, and he was just getting started. No Gogs had an extended fight scene with Immortal, which gives the latter a lot more credit than the comics did, where he pretty much died as soon as he showed up. But the show does preserve his method of death, as No Gogs tosses Immortal's severed head through one of Kate's clones. He relishes the deaths of his enemies, but is annoyed with himself because once more, he got carried away. He chastises himself for rushing to kill them all instead of enjoying the process, which is when Darkwing pulls him into the Shadowverse with himself. When the Guardians recover, Samson informs them of his heroic sacrifice, because there was no way he could fight an Invincible by himself, no matter where he takes him. The fact that No Gogs took out the new and improved Guardians so easily is what makes him one of the worst evil Mark Graysons out there, but perhaps not as evil as the next guy. Invincible with a small I. It's difficult classifying all these variants of Mark Grayson when the show doesn't do it for you, okay? So you guys better not make fun of how we're describing this guy, and hell, if he ever saw this video, we're sure we wouldn't be long for this earth either. Invincible with a small I, aka CW Invincible, is this high up on our list because he too was involved in killing a superhero team in his reality. Only, he didn't kill the Guardians of the Globe, whom he had no attachments to. He massacred the Teen Team, which was the first group that Invincible ever worked with. Robot, Rexplode, Atom Eve, and Duplicate. Those guys became Mark's first friends in the superhero community, but evidently, evil variants of him felt that they were too far beneath them to necessitate a team-up. CW Invincible proved that in this reality as well, when he broke into their base and took out all of Robot's drones with disgusting ease. He was surprised to see Rudy not looking like a malformed baby in a tube for once. But that distraction yielded the unlikeliest of opponents in Rexplode. CW had killed his reality's Rex with alarming ease, so he didn't see how this would be any different. Sure, Prime Rex's explosions tickled a bit more, but that's about it. He was invincible. He was the strongest person on Earth, bar his father, whom he probably killed. How did a lame, dim-witted Casanova like Rex plan on defeating him? Well, by turning his entire skeleton into an explosive. Rex's sacrifice was one of the best character moments in the entire franchise, because no one expected him to do something so heroic. Fans were just getting behind him, so to have Rex go out on a high feels like a gut punch, and that makes CW Invincible one of the worst Mark Grayson variants. No Mask Mark Grayson. In the comics, we're told that out of every reality that has a Mark Grayson, his identity is public in 40% of them. Perhaps that's why No Mask Mark wears no mask, but that doesn't make him any less sadistic. In the show, we see him fighting a giant, bulky superhero who no doubt is a stand-in for Pitt from Youngblood. He's left in a similar bloody heap by No Mask Mark, who is then seen in front of a burning metropolis and then above Mark's childhood home. He gets stranded in the wasteland dimension with all the other variants, and frankly, we're glad we didn't get to see his worst confession in the show, because it would have made an already uncomfortable situation even worse. In the comics, No Mask Mark killed the Atom Eve of his world. When he runs into Eve Prime, he fights her and tells her he'll take his time killing her. This happens before she gets injured and knocked out of the battle, but it's chilling for multiple reasons. There are many Invincibles in the multiverse who have killed the love of their lives instead of committing themselves to her. Atom Eve is a turning point nodule for Mark variants, because apart from what happens with her ranks just below what happens with his dad, in terms of things that end up changing them. No Mask Mark being one of the final survivors makes a lot of sense, but whether he'll make it out of the wasteland is an entirely different conversation. Viltrumite Invincible. While all Mark Graysons are evil, a few of them are more evil than others. That's certainly true for Viltrumite Invincible, who ends up becoming Emperor in his universe as Invincible. His costume bears the Viltrumite insignia on its shoulders, and he has fully embraced the might makes right mentality of his original species. Viltrumite Invincible shows up in London, destroys Big Ben, and then beats up a British superhero while yelling at him that he wouldn't even be a slave in his empire. Stephen Ewan's delivery of that line is so impactful that we can't help but be impressed with how he portrayed all these variants of his main character. But that's not it. Viltrumite Invincible also messed up much of Brit's team before ending up as one of the final 8. No doubt, he planned on turning on Angstrom Levy all the while that he was fighting for him, because in the end, all evil Invincibles are out for themselves. Viltrumite Invincible was one of the worst Mark Graysons that attacked Earth, but every variant from this point onward is the definition of being the worst. Hooded Mark Grayson. Hooded Mark Grayson looks a lot like the amazing Bagman persona that Peter Parker adopted for a time as part of the Fantastic Four. But while his costume was created for comedy, Hooded Mark's was created for maximum menace. His colour scheme is inverted, with the bulk of his costume being yellow while the Invincible symbol and his hood are blue. But his favourite colour seems to be red, seeing as he's always drenched in someone's blood. He engages the cyberforce of the Prime timeline and puts a beating on them that's worse than the one he handed to the cyberforce from his world. When Prime Mark and Atom Eve showed up to help them out, it took both of them to just keep Hooded Mark on his toes. And even that wasn't enough. He admitted that Prime Mark was stronger than him, but he also said that he'd be dead already if Prime Mark wasn't playing defense. We get a shot of the entire Cyberforce laid out in the wreckage of the streets as Hooded Mark leers at Eve from behind his mask. He ends up getting joined by another evil Invincible in battle, and the two of them force Prime Mark to retreat, but only one of them survives. And we're happy to say that that isn't this guy. We don't how we'd have felt if we saw this foul-mouthed rambler hovering over the Grayson household when all was said and done, and the same can be said for the next one. Blue Mark Grayson. Blue Mark Grayson is being called that because A, his costume is primarily blue, and B, he wears a bald cap to hide his baldness. Losing hair can make a man do some crazy things, but apparently, for Mark Grayson, craziness involves killing everything in his sight, even if that includes his half-brother and full mother. Blue Mark is encountered by Oliver when he starts helping with the relief effort during the Invincible War. After saving a bunch of civilians from debris, he spots Blue Mark flying overhead and chases him, thinking it's his brother. When Blue Mark turns around with a murderous grin on his face, Oliver realizes he's made a big mistake, and they end up duking it out on the streets. It becomes painfully clear just how much of a gap there is between their powers, because Oliver punches Blue hard, and all it does is fix the spinal issues he's been having for a while. Once he's back in top shape, he goes back for the young Viltrumite hybrid, who somehow manages to survive. The reason we call Blue Mark one of the worst Invincible variants is because at one point during the episode, he entered his childhood home and pretended to be hit, just so he could lure out Debbie. When it became clear that she wasn't there, he lamented the fact that he wouldn't get to kill her again and flew out of the roof. The way the series framed this scene made it hilarious, but once you take that away, the sheer coldness of what Blue Mark tried to do hits you in the face. He played possum for his mum, just to kill his mum. That's cold, even by our standards, and it definitely makes him one of the worst Mark Graysons in existence. But somehow, the top 4 are even worse. Prisoner Mark Grayson. What does being trapped in a Viltrumite prison do to a person? If you're Nolan Grayson, you realize you've been living a lie for centuries, make an orange, one-eyed alien friend, and break out of the joint to try and disassemble its foundations entirely. But if you're a variant of his son Mark, you spend a year being tortured by people who are supposed to be your kin. The fact that Prisoner Mark is wearing a Viltrumite uniform makes us think that he became a part of the Empire at some point, or maybe he just accepted the uniform Nolan kept for him in the closet since he came to Earth. Either way, at some point he went against Viltrum, and for that, he was imprisoned and repeatedly tortured to the point that he became embittered with his own people. In the show, we see him fly through the main square of Moscow, breaking buildings and calling it a good warm-up. But in the comics, he goes one step further and proclaims that he's waiting for his father. That means Nolan somehow betrayed his son in his reality, and that explains why Prisoner Mark is so unstable. He destroys cities and any superheroes that try standing up to him. When his fellow survivors start talking about killing Angstrom, he advocates for torture instead, because his mind is that far gone. Prisoner Mark could have become the worst nightmare for Prime Mark's dimension had he not been trapped in Levi's wasteland. But at least his character didn't need any embellishments. The one evil Mark variant who had a ridiculous glow-up from comic to screen is the next Mark on our list. And trust us when we say we did not expect him to be this effective. Omni Mark Grayson. In the comics, Omni Mark was a bit pissy. He showed up all, "Oh, I killed my dad and took his place, so who are you, small fry?" and ended up getting choked to death and turned into a reanimant. Omni Mark was punked out in the worst possible way. So when Amazon decided to give him the gravitas his character deserves, we were hyped, and our hype went through the roof when we realised that this guy was literally Omni-Man in Mark Grayson's body. His first dialogue in the episode saw him chastise another version of himself because Omni-Mark didn't think cursing was cool. He also flew straight for Eve, whom he hated and most likely killed in his dimension. Omni-Mark then proceeded to give Mark a beating he won't forget anytime soon, and he also broke Eve's leg, as nonchalant as can be. When he knew he had Prime Mark cornered, Omni-Man asked him if he was ready to give up, and only Cecil's intervention with his reanimant saved Prime Mark from answering that question. While Hooded Mark didn't survive their onslaught, Omni-Mark did, and he proceeded to lay waste to several major cities on planet Earth before reconvening over his childhood home. Once he got there, Omni-Mark declared that he hated it because it reminded him of the weak human mother that he killed to get where he is today. He is just a spiteful man and an embodiment of what could have happened had Nolan meant all those things he said to Mark during their first fight. It's as if Omni-Mark took all that to heart, killed everyone he loved, and started living life the Viltrumite way, just through the lens of his dad's superhero identity. We were so hyped to see him survive the Invincible War and become part of the Final 8, because we always thought he deserved it more than some of the other Marks, but perhaps not as much as our final 2, seeing as they're the worst of the whole lot. Mohawk Mark Grayson. Any man who flies through a maximum security federal prison in the United States of America and calls it light work is certifiably insane. But then again, no one said that Mohawk Mark wasn't. He was the first evil variant of himself that Prime Mark fought, and he was given a challenge straight out the gate. Mohawk Mark knew he was one of the strongest members of Angstrom's little invasion force. When Prime Mark arrived, he was more interested in discussing the beauty of his handiwork than answering his questions. And when he got annoyed by them, Mohawk Mark socked Prime Mark in the jaw. Their battle was so intense that it pretty much took apart the rest of the prison complex. But the two were equal in terms of strength. Mohawk was blocking everything Prime was throwing at him, and he even managed to break his nose with a headbutt. Prime Mark responded by hitting him with the Sherlock Holmes discombobulate and had to explain to the arriving Capes Incorporated that he was on their side. In the middle of handing over Mohawk Mark to them and getting Powerplex in hand, Prime Mark got called away to another location, which gave Mohawk the perfect chance to escape. He tanked Powerplex's electricity and played dead just long enough to let Capes Incorporated distract themselves. Once they were sufficiently occupied, he flew off to New York, where he destroyed the iconic Empire State Building. When Angstrom gathered his evil invincibles for his grand entrance, Mohawk was the most impatient of them all, and he also immediately agreed to kill him for personal gain. He's the most sadistic, cunning, and avarice-filled Mark variant of all time, and we will see just how low he can stoop in later seasons of Invincible. But his actions in Episode 8 alone were enough for us to call him one of the absolute worst Mark Grayson variants.
I murdered my own father. You really think you're gonna take me down?
Sinister Mark Grayson. And to close out this tier list, we bring you the actual worst Mark variant. The one guy who will become infamous when Prime Mark finally follows up on his Levy hunt in a meaningful way. Sinister Mark Grayson is the only one of all these variants who gets a bit of a backstory. In a Season 2 flashback, we see that he killed the wife and child of an alternate Angstrom Levy, and he did so with spine-chilling amusement. His last words to Levy Jr. were that he'd made it quick, and while that can be seen as mercy in some cultures, the splat sound effect we heard in the aftermath suggests it was everything but merciful. Sinister Mark is the first one out the gate in Episode 8, and because Amazon didn't have the rights to many of the Image Comics crossover characters, his involvement feels a little off-putting. In the comics, Sinister Mark fought Firebreather, who is the half-human, half-dragon son of the demon Belloc. Firebreather can access many extremely powerful, monstrous forms, and in Sinister Mark's universe, he killed the guy. In the TV show, Sinister Mark ends up facing Best Tiger, which is also a decent crossover, seeing as Tiger is basically Image Comics' Daredevil. He wears a blindfold, not because he's blind, but because he appreciates the challenge that being sightless presents to him, and he doesn't tolerate evil in the least. Best Tiger is taunted by Sinister Mark for his humanity, but he proves he's no laughing matter by shooting him out of the air with a special laser gun. We don't see their battle play out too extensively, but considering we don't see Best Tiger again, we have to assume Sinister Mark won. In the comics, he also fights Oliver for a brief time, ridiculing him for being a filthy half-breed with less than a quarter of his own strength. Sinister Mark is one of the most roughed-up, evil, invincible variants by day 3 in the comics, but in the show, he's pretty much unscathed. He also shares Omnimark's hatred for their childhood home, and is the first person to question Angstrom's delay in arriving. As soon as he does, Sinister Mark turns on the guy because his promises haven't been worth jack, and they're the ones who are getting killed for his agenda. He effectively organises a mutiny against his employer, and because all evil Mark variants are power-hungry individuals, they join him without question. Levy strands Sinister Mark in the wasteland first, followed by the rest of the remaining Invincibles. Sinister Mark vows to find a way out of that place the last time we see him, but this won't be the last time we see him. Sinister will show up again in about a couple seasons, and show you why he really is the worst Invincible variant of all time. Don't believe us? Go watch the Cannibal Mark Origins video for further details, because we don't want to spoil it any more than that for you guys. But let's just say, he's the only Invincible willing to do anything to survive. That includes throwing a Donner party, and we wish we were talking about kebabs. Marvelous verdict. But you can push that terrifying image right out of your head, because that's all we've got for you guys in this one. Let us know your thoughts on these evil, Invincible variants, and which of them you find to be the worst in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Invincible content, and we will see you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe, and don't make any enemies that can hop across dimensions unless you want the worst mirror therapy session of your life.